Chapter 2 Girl Power. We stood in line impatiently. Master Michel stroked his chin as he paced, deep in thought. He was a tall man with girly long hair pulled back in a ponytail. His face was that of a heaven-born. It was flawless, even scrunched in thought. He pondered a second or two longer before taking an exhaustive breath. Well, as you all know, you are here for the Waldy's battalion tryouts, he explained, walking with his hands crossed in front of him in a sophisticated manner. Now, I will emphasize that the point of this tryout is not about legions. A battalion team does not consist of the best legions. It consists of the best guardsmen. There are 30 positions on this squad, and the pure purpose of this team is survival and battle. Even though a strategy is used, the objective is to survive. Tournament Battalion is a weekly televised competition battle between each house. This is the same without the fanfare. Although it still gains points for the house and showcases talent, if a Waldy shows himself to be an asset, he may be promoted to the tournament team. So this team is taken very seriously, and with the... He paused as embarrassment overtook him. He tried to find the right way to say what he was thinking. Let's say, humble state of our current team, and the plethora of talent we received in this year's class. This year's team will be especially vital, he continued. He wasn't exaggerating. The Benjamin House's tournament team didn't win a single match in last year's competition, and this year's Waldy class was expected to be promoted fairly quickly. It was the reason they chose the Benjamin House after our power-packed group did. They felt they had the opportunity to compete and become a part of a competitive tournament team as Waldys, and it was a position they couldn't pass up. So I've decided from Mr. Eli down, he replied. Woo! A gentle gravity push separated the line right down the middle. I looked over to see Pete on the other side with Eve, Cy, Joe, Beth, Pete, Danny, Abby, Zach, and Sam. On my side was the remaining ABAs, Ariel and Jada. He replied, looking us over. Woom, woom, swap, woom. He moved us like chess pieces, trying to get the perfect matchup. That should do it, he replied, nodding, satisfied. When he finished, it was literally the boys versus the girls, with all the girls from our legion on one side and all the boys on the other. Are you sure about this? Sam replied. I mean, it seems pretty one-sided. Yeah, you put all the best fighters on one side, said a kid I didn't recognize. What? Are you kidding me, Basson? Said a black-haired girl on the other side. Well, I mean, I didn't mean it like that, the kid quickly tried to cover. I mean, it does seem a bit, not you, but overall. I mean, look at this. You guys are going to get slaughtered.
Whatever.
Well, we wouldn't hurt them, really, Pete added, almost stopping immediately
What's
in
over
regret.
here?
Sorry, I mean, we aren't going to hurt each other, as in, like they give us special gear that just shuts us down when we are knocked out.
Whatever.
Eve shot a look at him that would stop a car. Sam recoiled, a bit intimidated, as Eve's stare seemed to be the vanguard of our destruction. The girl's initial look of confusion quickly changed to determination. That's what I want to see, Master Michel added. True competition. The object of battalion is to capture the opposing enemy's king. His words immediately sparked a roll of the eyes of the girls. It's a term for the designated player, he apologized. I didn't choose it. The object is to capture the king, bring he or she back, and deactivate him at your home base. Also, if you wipe out the entire unit of the opposing squad, it's also a win. What we will be grading you on is your ability to cooperate within a unit, and your overall skill and talent. Now, the final caveat is the king is hidden. The teams designate him or her in the beginning. So, what happens if we end up destroying the king because we don't know who she is? I asked, causing another shooting shot from Sai. Or they don't know who he is. I raised my hands in a begging manner of surrender. She looked away. Things were tense. I was looking forward to a light scrimmage, but it was becoming vividly apparent that the girls no longer had that in mind. They looked us up and down like we were their worst rivals. "Well, that's the point," Master Michel answered. "The purpose is to get the other team to unknowingly destroy your king. If they do, then there is no other choice. They must win in a head-up battle, or they automatically lose." "Well, how will we know if we have the right person?" Eve pressed. Master Michel smiled in a provoking manner. "That's the art of it. You don't. So it causes you to choose a course of action. Normally, it's a full frontal assault or strategy-based recon. The king's sacrifice is generally only used in desperate situations, when a team has a lone member left, or if they are outnumbered. It immediately wins the game," he explained as the arena around us changed. The gymnasium-like halo room converted into a holographic maze-like grid with walls and barriers. In a flash of light, we were standing at our base, and the girls were gone. I shook off the cobwebs as he continued in holographic form. "Now, each team will have BAU capsule, which will outline the task of the king that might allow the other team to recognize him or her. The object is to break into the base, identify the king, and assassinate him after incapacitating him with this bracelet," he explained. As he spoke, a glowing white bracelet made of anointed metal appeared on top of the BAU capsule, sitting on a war desk in our war debriefing room. "You will have 10 minutes to figure out the task and identity of your king," he explained. "At that time, the capsule will be uploaded and the king will be tagged and the match will begin. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," everyone replied, as the hologram disappeared. The 10 minutes felt like 5 seconds. Pete kept quiet as a teen kid mapped things out. Everyone looked to Pete, but this kid was older and assertive. No one chose him. No one even knew who he was. He was a tall kid with a bird-like nose. He spoke in a condescending manner to everyone but the members of the ABA squad and ours. For the most part, his strategy was terrible. He made the mistake of believing the only girls who were a threat were the members of our legion, and the rest of the girls would only be as good as Abby's strategy. I almost laughed out loud. I moved to speak, but the kid was such a blockhead to anyone that questioned his plan, I didn't waste my breath. "That doesn't make any sense," Pete replied, finally speaking up. "These 2 girls alone have the ability to long-range teleport. Leaving this flank unmanned is a huge liability." The kid cut his eyes at Pete. He nodded his head in a challenging manner. "Exactly. That's why it's bait," he shot back. "Bait?" Sam shot. "Even I would know not to take something that obvious. It's terrible bait. Like Pete said, if they use a long-range teleporter, they could get into that very spot undetected, and we would be at a huge disadvantage." The kid stared, embarrassed. He hadn't even understood Pete's actual point in bringing up the teleportation. This kid was clueless, and under his leadership, we were going to be slaughtered. We all were guilty of assuming we had the upper hand on the girls when they put me, Sam, and Pete on the same team. But we knew it wasn't going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. Abby showed intelligence as a leader in the trials. It was going to be an obvious advantage if we underestimated her. Herschel was a technician, but he was more about battle. He wasn't really a strategist. That was Pete's expertise. I assured myself that this guy would be gone fairly quickly, and it was the only thing keeping me quiet. "Pete," I shot via BAU, "please communicate a real plan to the rest of us. This guy is going to get destroyed." "He has all the vitals," he answered. "Even if I wanted to, I can't do anything without it. We only get one, and he uploaded it before the rest of us could even vote on who should be captain." Who is this guy? Sam joined. Ashton Stenell, Herschel shot. He's a hygen. It's one of the top-tier light guard preparatory schools. More like predatory school, Cal cracked. All the guys who aren't good enough to get into the Alpha House end up there. It's full of guys making excuses for why they didn't make the cut. They have these huge chips on their shoulders which causes them to be like this. Look at his Legion mates. From the minute they chose this house, they had their mind made up that they would impress you guys. I rolled my eyes at the irony of a guy trying to impress us by rudely ignoring everything we had to say. Well, he's doing a bad job, Zach added. Yeah, that kid's an idiot, Joe seconded. Pete, think up something. Pete rolled his eyes. I'm not a computer. I need data to analyze. Maybe once things kick off, I'll have a better chance of creating something, but as of right now, we are stuck, Pete shot back. You got something to say, Theta? Said one of Ashton's Legion mates. They caught a glimpse of Pete's eye roll and assumed it had something to do with Ashton's plan. I can tell from the look on their faces that they too had reservations about this guy's plan, and were begging for Pete to intervene. I'm sorry, go ahead, Pete submitted. His words caused a grunt within the group. Ashton's group joining in caused him to pause. No, Theta, if you think you can do better, he shot. Pete, please, Joe begged. I can't do anything without the upload. It would be blind if I chose to lead now, Pete continued. Well, a good thing for you I haven't used it, he replied, pulling out the capsule, causing everyone to grunt loudly. The majority of us just stared, angered by his ignorance. I wanted to punt his head out a window. You have got to be kidding me, Howell sighed, shaking his head. We just spent the majority of our time learning a plan that had no data to support it, I shot angrily. This is a tryout, Ashton replied, not some Hannock simulation. Finally, his behavior made sense. He saw Pete as competition and was trying to solidify his spot as one of the strategists on the battalion squad by upstaging Pete. It was idiotic, and I was fuming just thinking about it. Ash, one of his Legion mates grunted. Are you serious? No wonder this plan made no sense. That upload has all the zone mapped. The anointment barriers vary depending on the sectors. Without those schematics, you're sending us blindly. You could be sending our strongest fighters to the densest barriers against their best non-anointed fighters. That's your belief, but in a real battle, you're not going to have any of that crap. You're not going to know the layout or the strength and weaknesses of your opponents. We're fighting lightweights. Why not take advantage and make ourselves look all the better? He explained. This guy can't be this dense, Herschel added, slapping himself in the head. I don't know how the rest of you see it, but I know the girls on my Legion are as good as most of the guys over here, and they're pissed. Abby's not going to underestimate us, and Caddy can't wait to go on a rampage. It's retarded for us to underestimate them. Ashton stopped, as if to be taking in Herschel's words before putting his hands up in a pleading manner. Besides, kid, it's also our job to utilize every asset we have. How does it look to the evaluators that we would ignore vital information for the sake of ego? That'd go over like a lead balloon, Cal added. Ashton seemed genuinely regretful as he took in their words. Shoot, I didn't think about that. I guess I just got caught up in the advantages we had. I maximized the positives and ignored the negatives, he replied. I rolled my eyes, not really wanting to come to his defense, but a part of me felt bad for him. Look, what's done is done, I cut in, wanting to kick myself for helping him out of his humongous flub. Let's just tweak the original plan, Pete. What about that? He extended his hand with a nod as Ashton placed the upload there. Pete cracked the seal and opened it, as the light shot from the paper as his eye lit up. They slowly dimmed as he turned to us. He was like a machine. He went block by block, fixing every inefficiency in Ashton's plan and adding new strategies that blew us all away. "I see why they beat the Hanach," said a kid, nodding as Pete explained things. "This kid's got skills." "Yeah, imagine what he could have done with a full 10 minutes, a kid from Ashton's Legion replied, playfully shoving Ashton's head. Ashton ignored it. He was enamored, and even though Pete was the mastermind, he was very useful, and with the help, he showcased a brilliant mind of his own as he pointed out vital plots. We all nodded, absorbing their words just as the gong went off. As it did, the protective barrier that protected our base disappeared. "It's the best I could do with such limited time," Pete continued. "Good enough, Theta," Herschel added, patting him on the back. We all shot to our spots as the contest finally began. Clash! Immediately, I heard clashing of blades, signaling there was contact. Pete decided to make Sam the king and make me the point man. It was my job to protect Sam. He figured with Sam's durability and my skills, at worst, leaving the two strongest fighters on the team as the last line of defense was the smartest idea. Ashton chose to send us with the heavy line assault to make quick work of the weaker competitors, which would give us a chance to outnumber the rest. Pete quickly deduced it would filter out their weaker prospects and cause their strongest to become more concentrated. He figured his way would allow the stronger competitors to be spread out, thus making them easier to take advantage of. "Looks like things are kicking off," Sam added. Pete had them mapped out to a T. He knew that Psy would try to avoid Pete and I at all costs. Eve, he figured, would stay back to protect Beth to ensure she performed at her best. Cadmiel, he figured, would be on the front, which would make her an excellent candidate for the king position, because no one would expect it. He figured Psy was their strongest, and the only person on their team that could protect Cadmiel against me. He sent Zek, Joe, Jaden, Howell, and the rest of the heavy line to meet him. He wanted them to keep the stronger girls occupied, while we took out the rest of the weaker opponents. He and Herschel stayed with the last line. His idea was Sam and I would work our way around, taking out Eve, Beth, Danny, and Abby. Once their best fighters were taken out, we would press back until we had Psy and Cadmiel surrounded. From there, we would force them back until they were in our zone, and then we would move in and end the match. It was genius, but it relied on me and Sam to a fault. It was going to take an awful lot of resolve for us to take on our friends, but I'm guessing that was what made things even in Master Michelle's eye. Smash! Boom! I shoulder blocked Sam out of the way, just as an elemental shot struck a nearby wall. Sam used my momentum, diving into a barrel roll. He bounced parkour style, leaping into an adjacent wall. Wham! He caught the nearby girl with a back kick, just as she emerged over my right shoulder, sending her flying into a tree across the river. "Nice," I replied, as he landed inches in front of me. Zong! Her suit softened her blow, creating a gravity field. It exploded in kinetic energy, then shorted as she collapsed and disappeared. Hey, these suits protect us from any real damage, I thought as I inspected my outfit. This may not be so tough after all. "Yeah, well, let's get going," Sam replied as we ducked into cover. We made our way around a corner, moving undetected for a little while, before coming across a large opening that was heavily occupied. "Great, there's like 10 of them," I grunted. Pete predicted this way was bare. "You take 5, I take 5, Sam grunted. I begrudgingly agreed with a nod of my head. Flash! Before they could blink, Sam and I were standing in the middle of them. "Go," I replied, leaping into action. Shock! Sam sent a massive shockwave that exploded through them. Wham! I nailed one girl. Flip! Kick! Sam leapfrogged me with a no-hand cartwheel, leveling one of them with a kick to the chest that sent her flying into a couple of her comrades. Whoosh! I sent a concentrated wind shot that took out two of them, exploding in a gigantic power punch. Zonk! They all collapsed immediately. Watch the buttons on the front and back of our uniform. They're the shut-off buttons, I explained, catching on quick. Okay, so aim for it? Sam asked. Yeah, I think so, I replied. Block! I emitted a light shot that protected me and Sam as the girls around us released a concentrated light energy shot of their own. They're the heavy hitters, Sam, I replied. Boom! Vibrate! He nodded as my light shield vibrated wildly as their light energy contacted it. Boom! Go! I shot as we dove for cover behind a wall. What is going on? Sam shot. I thought they would be with Psy and Cadmiel. I shrugged as it all made sense. It looks like Abby and Pete had the same idea. I shot, laughing. Sam grunted, shaking his head, frustrated. So that means, Sam uttered, putting his head in hands. Yep, Eve? I screamed. Eve? Sam shot. What about Beth? Isn't she supposed to be protecting her? Well, Pete said this was a possibility with Eve's temper. She probably left Beth with the snipers, but it's also a possibility she's also here. I wouldn't be surprised if Ruth and Uni were here as well. Uni, Sam replied, his eyes growing. Sam, move! I shot, leaping into action. Just as I spoke, I grabbed Sam and went into flash mode as shots rained in from just in front of us. It was a trap. Their plan was to lull us long enough for Uni and Eve to get a clear shot. We narrowly dodged the bullets as they exploded off the wall. Tim, I hope that doesn't stop you from taking it easy on us, Eve poked, 'cause I want every ounce of smoke. Somebody's big mad, huh? I shot sarcastically. Sam and I looked at each other, laughing at the irony. We didn't need to go find the strong line. They were all right here. Well, we were looking for the strong line, Sam shot. If I'm being 100, I shot with a telling nod. I think a part of me wanted this. It's been A1 with Evie since the island, Sam shot. I guess we get to see how far we've all come since then. She was always the weakest of the three of us, and that's with her constantly selling all those wolf tickets. I turned to him with a shake of my head, as if we hadn't done enough to provoke her before the match. He stopped me, pointing to his head, signaling it was a plan. I nodded, understanding exactly what his plan was. It was shrewd and heady on Sam's part. If Eve had a weakness, it was her temper. She couldn't control it. We had been backed into a forest barrier, and we were surrounded by wildlife. It was impossible to see anything, even with my super sight. Right now, we were completely vulnerable to her and Uni's assault. Luckily, they were together, and with Eve's temperament, that was a liability. If we found Eve, we would find Uni. So, if we got Eve mad enough to give her position away, both girls would be vulnerable. Eve, don't! Ruth shot via BAU. It took everything Eve had not to speak. Ruth stared at the side of her head. She understood how much of their plan relied on them slowing down Sam and I. Her heart beat a mile a minute. No girl on the heavy line wanted to face me or Sam. Eve agreeing to accompany them was the only way the girls agreed to even come. So she could only imagine their resolve without her. I could feel them, even without them saying a word. At the time, I could feel the uneasiness in their faith energy. It fluctuated like crazy. You sure you don't want us to take it easy on you? I continued, provoking her more. There was silence after my words, but I knew Eve. All she needed was a push, and eventually she would give her position away. I looked at Sam with a wink. A part of me felt guilty, but Eve could hold her own. I had no doubt she would impress well enough to make the team, but right now it was about winning. I wasn't about to lose to my girlfriend in a head-to-head battle. As soon as she gives her position away, we take her out, I shot via BAU. We can worry about the rest of the strong line after, but Eve is priority one. Sam nodded with a mischievous smile. Eve's mind, for the first time since she left her sister, was on the match. She had forgotten all about the misogynistic words at the beginning of the tryout. She tried hard to okay her sister accompanying her on the heavy line, but with her skill set, it was an uphill battle from the get-go. In the end, Beth convinced her she had a better chance of making the team as last-line shooter. Eve was still uneasy, but our words quickly took her mind off of her sister. She knew we were provoking her deep down, but the small part that believed it was true couldn't back down. Sam and I were good, and she knew it. A part of her was ashamed at how powerful we had gotten in comparison to her. She was elite, but she felt inferior to her elemental counterparts, and we were pecking at her ego with every statement we made. "Okay, offer going once," Sam prodded. "Twice. And Evie, don't think I'm going to go easy on you just because you think I'm cute." That did it. Her faith energy spiked at the sound of Sam's words. "Sam, I'm going to," Eve uttered angrily before being cut off abruptly. I immediately locked onto her energy signature as it spiked. Ruth quickly reacted, covering Eve's mouth, but she was too late. We leaped into action, immediately attacking them. Wham! I caught one of her comrades with a flying back kick that knocked her out of the tree and sent her spiraling down below. Boom! Zonk! She landed with a loud thud, knocking her out of the game as her shutdown button exploded. Uni cocked her gun, aiming at me. She looked terrified as I smiled, intimidating her long enough for her to hesitate briefly. Wham! Sam hit her with a shoulder charge that cleaned her clock and sent her soaring toward a nearby tree. Swat! Just before she made contact with the tree, Ruth interchanged with her, stopping her momentum. "Thanks, Ruth," Uni replied, hunkered over. I turned to Sam, grimacing in frustration. "What happened?" I asked via BAU. "Why didn't you just take her out by hitting the shutdown button?" Sam pointed in the direction of Ruth, who was helping Uni to her feet. "Ruth saved her using the in and out technique. I missed," Sam replied, with a determined look on his face. We failed to take out Ruth and Uni, but at least we got one. We were still exactly where we wanted to be. We stood on either side of Eve. Ruth and Uni were in no position to help, and we had her at a disadvantage. Hashtag checkmate, I shot with a playful smile. "See? There you go, underestimating me again," Eve replied. Whoosh! The wind around her created a familiar bluish hue that covered her in a protective case of sound. "Did you forget?" she replied as her eyes lit up. "Unlike you two, I actually learned to protect myself during Jade's training." Sizzle! The wind sizzled like a gas, covering her in a protective mist. "Defense is my specialty," she replied. "Tim, hi!" Sam ordered, almost like we had one word. I caught on immediately. Swipe! I shot toward Eve, causing her to duck down. I could have taken a shot at her, but I told myself with her sound control, it would be a useless waste of energy. That was a good excuse, but the truth was, I couldn't have hit Eve if I wanted to. After years of fantasizing about her being my girlfriend, the last thing I was prepared to do was hit her. I was at odds with myself. "Tim, move!" Sam warned as he powered up for a shot. Bounce! I leaped off of her high block, keeping her in place and clearing out room for Sam's attack. Boom! Sam slashed with an energy shot that destroyed the branch just below Eve as she narrowly dove to a nearby branch. Clang! I pulled my staff out, intercepting a nearby attack from my blind side. The girl's eyes grew large as my attention turned to her. It was like a tick on a dog's ear. I parried her blow with ease. "They're the heavy hitters, Sam," I replied. "Woo! Vibrate!" He nodded as my light shield vibrated wildly as their light energy contacted it. "Go!" I shot as we dove for cover behind a wall. It was like a tick on a dog's ear. I parried her blow with ease. Man! I caught her directly in her shutdown button with a kick. I took a little off the kick, but there was still enough momentum to send her crashing into a nearby tree and sliding down to the ground below. "Katie," said a voice. Swipe! She was a dematerializer. She was angry and extremely skilled. Her face was filled with rage as she swung wildly at me. She was trying to cut me in half, but as determined as she was no match. I dodged her blow without breaking a sweat. She swung a large battle axe with speed and efficiency. I spun, blocking it just enough to lodge her shot into the trunk of the tree we stood on. I sent a back elbow into her chest, causing her to release the weapon and backpedal. She fought to get her bearings as I finished her off with a spinning roundhouse. The shot made her do a full front flip and crash face first into the branch we were fighting on. I gave her shutdown button a slight jab that sent a shock throughout her body, causing her to fall limp. The heavy hitters consisted of the top close and mid-range fighters on the squad, and we had dispatched 4 of them with little effort. Fat, fat, fat! I turned to see Eve and Sam in a heated exchange. Sam shot blow after blow. Eve used his momentum to create a large enough buffer to divert all his shots, but parrying Sam's shots were harder than Cadmium's. Her shots were just pure power. Sam's shots were accompanied by powerful light energy. Even when she blocked his blows, she still had to be mindful of the sparks and transfer of energy. Clash! Pop! Eve slammed an energy shot of her own into Sam's, causing an explosion of power. She used the blast to flip high in the air. She gave herself room before disappearing into the forest. Slash! Grip! Another girl swung her bow like a baseball bat, trying to capitalize on Eve's attack. Sam caught the shot with one hand. Rip! Kill! Ah! Thud! Sam ripped the bow from her hand and tossed it to the side before catching her with a side kick that sent her flying hard into a tree trunk. Thud! She went limp as she shut down. "Come on, Sam, take it easy," I said via BAU, thrown by the ferocity of his attack. "Sorry," he shot back subconsciously. "I can't really control this yet. You add the limit these anti-anointment barriers are putting on our powers. It's hard to gauge things. Besides, they told us not to take it easy." He was right. Each barrier had a different anti-anointment barrier threshold that made it hard to gauge how much of our power was being drained. It was harder for me to understand, since the anti-anointment didn't suffocate my powers as much as the rest of the prospects. But the closer we traveled toward the base, the more I could feel the anti-anointment barrier getting stronger. But that wasn't what had me uneasy. Sam wasn't being honest. The move Sam performed wouldn't be possible if he couldn't gauge his power. I swallowed my reservations, focusing on the battle at hand. "Well, that's 5 down, 5 to go," I explained. "Did you happen to catch where Eve went?" Sam asked, slightly embarrassed. "No, your exchange took my attention off her for a second, and with her speed, that's all she needs," I begrudgingly explained. Eve was breathing hard as she linked back up with Uni, Ruth, and what was left of the heavy line. She was lucky to have survived her exchange with Sam, and she knew it. She fought feelings of doubt as Ruth and Uni walked up to her. "Good job," Ruth replied, patting her on the back. "Yeah, we thought you were a goner," Uni seconded. "I almost was," Eve replied, pulling a med cell from her pouch. The cold sensation of the synthetic light energy made her queasy. It washed over her body, healing her in a flash of light. She moved her hand as the feeling slowly returned. It had gone numb after the power shot that separated her and Sam. She shook her hand wildly as the pain subsided. She knew they had no chance if this kept up. They had underestimated Sam in their assessment. They figured sending her would cause Tim to hesitate, but they didn't anticipate that Sam would be so far along in his development. His display at the trials wasn't a fluke. Sam was that good, and she saw it firsthand. He was no longer all physical strength and determination. The trials had taught him to trust all his abilities. The elements were a tool he now used effortlessly. His control, mixed with his natural fighting ability, made him a formidable foe. It was going to take some doing for her to beat him, and with me tagging along, it was going to be impossible, even with them having the numbers. Their only hope was to retreat and regroup. She wasn't sure if her last shot had given her the opening she needed, but it was the best chance they were going to get. "Uni, let's give these guys some cover fire," she shot via BAU. "That should give them the ability to retreat. Then we can separate and meet back up at the base." Uni agreed with a nod. She reached over her back, grabbing the huge gun that hung from her harness. "Are you sure you're going to be okay, Uni?" Ruth replied. "I don't want to have to save you again." Uni responded with a nod, trying to hide her embarrassment. "Yes, I'll meet you at the base," she replied, trying to mask her show of uncertainty. "I promise." "Okay, you guys, we'll cover you," Eve ordered. "Go, go!" Scatter! The moving of tree limbs caught our attention yet again. We spun around, preparing ourselves for another attack. Our attention quickly shot to the area where the sound came from. "Now we're on the run again," Sam replied. Shots exploded around Sam as he jumped for cover. "Tim, look out!" he replied, catching my attention as he dove behind a nearby tree. Pow! Boom! I went to help him, but Uni sent shots, cutting me off. I barrel rolled out of the way, then jumped into cover as another shot narrowly missed me. "What's going on?" Sam shot in a self-contemplating tone. "That attack made no sense. Why would they expose their position so quickly?" "They're retreating," I deducted quickly. "They were just trying to stall us." Eve and Uni shot off in different directions. They disappeared before we could get a bead on them. Eve and Uni are powerful. Even if we somehow ran them down, our team would be annihilated in the time it would take to beat them. I'm sure Eve thought it up after we trashed their original plan. They weren't trying to give themselves the opportunity to get away. They were hoping we'd go after them. They were decoys. "So that means the others," I shot, scanning the battlefield. "Light!" My eyes lit up as I scanned the forest, looking for one of the fleeing competitors. "Straight ahead, and the others at 4 o'clock, I pointed out. "Okay, I got the one on the right," Sam replied, shooting off. Flash! I shot forward, zooming toward the other girl as I bounced from branch to branch, trailing her. It was only a matter of seconds before I ran her down. Swoop! I landed hard, cutting her off just before she reached the barrier. "Whoa," she replied, thrown by my landing. She had beautiful golden hazel eyes. She was a beautiful girl by any standard, but it was hid behind a wall of fear. She wore a look of terror as she surveyed me up and down. "Timothy Eli," she replied. "Just my luck." I didn't say a word, but inside I felt like a total heel. I wished I could let her go, but it was a tryout. The purpose for the tryout was to get the best. The guys from the other houses wouldn't take it easy on us, and so it would be dangerous to put someone on the team who wasn't good enough, right? My mind was going a mile a minute, trying to convince myself that what I was doing wasn't wrong. "Well, if I have any chance of making the team, this is it," she replied. "Maybe holding my own against you is my last and probably my best chance at making the team." "If you say so," I replied, not really knowing what to say, but still wanting to sound confident. She was a complete enigma. She spoke in a cautious manner, but it had little to do with being afraid or intimidated. Mara Yael was never confused with a go-getter. The only reason she even did the trials was to get out of interning with her parents on their tour. Her mother was one of the biggest acts in the quadrant, and her father was a fairly popular comedic star. She grew up in that life and decided at a young age that it wasn't the life for her. She stated she didn't have the drive to be in show business. She was a natural fighter and excelled with little effort through prep school. Her legion was one of the top standout legions at the Light Guard trials during our cycle, and she was their top standout. Her performance, accompanied by her parents' notoriety, made her one of the biggest stars of the cycle's trials. She had ability. That ability would have led her into the academy based on her pre-trial score alone. She shocked the entire Light Guard community when she and her legion chose to follow us to the Benjamin House. But all that was inconsequential at that moment. Now she was staring down the top prospect in the class. A part of her wanted to just hit her own button, but for a reason only she knew, that wasn't an option. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked skeptically. Even I could tell she wasn't as geared up for the fight as her words portrayed. "Like it matters," she replied. She powered up, causing me to go on guard. Her power wasn't anything impressive. I didn't even feel the need to match her actions. "I'm still not sure you're..." Slice! I narrowly dodged as she took out the branch along with the entire tree I was standing on. Crash! I landed on another tall tree branch as the last tree fell over, crashing into the ground below. "Does that answer your question, kid?" she asked, pointing her sword at me. I couldn't believe what happened. Her power exploded at the point of her attack. It was massive. She also moved with blazing speed. She could have annihilated me if she wanted to, but her blow was a warning shot. What was shocking was the focus of it. It seemed to concentrate and explode. It was impossible to gauge how powerful she actually was. "Grab!" I pulled my staff from its holster once again. "Loud and clear," I replied with a smirk. She returned my smile with a shake of her head. "Wow, you really are the cutest Earthborn guy I've ever seen," she replied. "Has anyone ever said that to you before?" "Nice. And you were naturally born with that mug?" I shook my head at the nonsensical comment. "Cut the crap," I shot, unfazed by her words. "I know the last thing on your mind is the way I look. I'm more perceptive than that. You're trying to rope me into dropping my guard again. It's how you capitalize and use that ability of yours. I'm guessing your entire demeanor is a part of your fighting style. Some cynical form of the hidden hand." "Exactly," she replied, leaping into action. Ping, 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 ping. We clashed weapons ferociously. She was amazingly gifted with her sword. I used every skill in my arsenal to keep up. I was physically her superior, and even though she came across as a slacker, she didn't fight like one. She was by far my superior in technique and experience. I clumsily tried to block every one of her well-timed and pointed strikes. I was so used to my staff overpowering the people I faced that I never actually learned to use it. Spark! I sent off a flare to back her off of me. She flipped backward, covering her eyes, shielding herself from the blast. Who was this girl? She was amazing. It was almost like she knew every move I was going to make before I did. Slash! Before I could realize what was going on, I felt a slice to the back of my armor. The weight of the blade caught me off guard. I dived forward before the blow could actually land flush. My sudden movement caused her strike to create sparks instead of cutting me in half. Dive kick! I spun, going with the momentum of the shot. I knocked the blade of the shot to the side with my staff, and I finished her off with a quick back kick that caught her flush in the chest. The kick sent her sprawling backward. Stab! She used her sword in a downward strike to slow her motion before she met the tree trunk. She stopped just in time. She looked up, moving the hair that hung in her face to the side. "Man, you are as good as advertised," she replied, smiling as she wiped new blood from her mouth. "Yeah, it's a lot of that in the air," I replied, raising my guard. This girl was quick, and she wasn't going to catch me off guard. The first 2 times were close enough. I gauged her as she flowed, showcasing a concealing smirk. I knew taking her lightly was a mistake I couldn't afford a second time. This girl's experience and power could end this exchange in a heartbeat. Her demeanor made her extremely hard to analyze, and she continued to give a thin, veiled expression that gave me no other option. What I didn't know was she was bluffing the whole time. She knew she was no match for me. Her plan was to gather her energy for precise strikes. With her ability, it was her best chance. She knew the rules of time and space. Bursts only affect their timeline. The minute they interacted or came in direct contact with another human being, the time paradox snapped back to normal, and with my reflexes and extrasensory touch, she would never be fast enough to land a strike. She understood her best chance of surviving our showdown was to bluff me into taking her lightly. But she had missed her best shot, and she knew there was no way I was easing up anymore. She showcased a smile, but deep down, she was kicking herself behind her concealing smirk. "I'm sorry," I replied. "I think it's time to crank it up, because if I don't, I'm pretty sure you're going to cut me in half." My power exploded to another level as I destroyed the environment around me. She shielded herself at my massive power, yet still sported a smirk as if to be impressed by my showing. Meanwhile, Sam had caught the other assailant. He landed hard on a tree branch inches in front of her with his back to the girl. Dodge! She immediately dodged, leaping backward. Her mind was going a mile a minute. She cursed herself for not taking the ground route. She knew the chance of her being spotted was greatly increased by taking the higher route. She underestimated the speed of her stalker. Now she felt like cornered prey. "Man," she uttered under her breath. Sam showed no sign of empathy as he turned toward her. His eyes were blazing. He stared at the view. The sudden jolt of adrenaline was only hastened by her physiology. Tola's dual hearts were pumping overtime. She understood she would have to face down different races, but she never thought she would be staring down a human at Sam's level so soon. She could feel his power oozing from him. Even in his conservative state, it was intimidating. "I guess this always was a possibility," she replied, pulling her blade from its sheath. It was a machete-shaped blade, with a gold hilt that ran along the back of the blade. Sam didn't feel the need to reach for his blades. He was deep in thought. His mind immediately dwelled on every doubter, from his father to me. It was like he blinked out as the power flowed through him. He released his wrath in a quick, efficient shot to her shutdown button. Wham! Before Tola could blink, she felt the cold shiver of her body shutting down before an explosion of light. She was surprised by the viciousness of the blow. It was not a blow that one would delve out to a comrade. Crush! She landed hard against a nearby trunk with shattering force. The sudden impact was shocking. Master Michel shook his head, watching from a holo monitor. Sam's ferocity was concerning. Yes, it was a live scrimmage, but Sam's blow was violent in a way that was not necessary, and it sent a shiver up his spine. He stroked his chin, not really knowing how to react to what was happening, as he turned his attention back to me and Mara. "Cool," she replied as I finally cut my power ascent. "Pretty awesome tribal tats." Whoa! My body was covered in tattoo markings as I glowed like a star. It wasn't even a tenth of my power, but with the anti-anointment shield, it was as good as I could muster without any real motivation. "Tribal tats?" I replied, looking myself up and down. Yeah, it's your DNA signature, she replied. The more powerful you become, the more of them become illuminated. I heard arcs don't have tats, they just are covered in light. It's pretty cool. Before I could react, she attacked again. I shielded myself with little effort. She continued, breathing heavily. I'll bet you don't know the average Waldy can only illuminate cells when they concentrate their power in one area of their body, do you? Kick! I caught her with a kick to the side of her knee, breaking her stance. Nope, I replied, leaping into action. I leaped in the air, landing hard against her guard, sending myself backward in a flip. I landed on my back underneath her defense and finished her off with a drop kick to the stomach. You really have no idea how powerful you are? She replied as I landed the ending blow. She dropped to one knee, staring me in the eye. There was no grandstanding or gloating in her action. For a second, I felt I had taken it a little too far, but my hesitation was all she needed. It's kind of cute, though, she shot, smiling, just before she vanished. She vanished in a second, and before I could blink, I could feel the wind from the force of her blade at my back. If it wasn't me, it would have been the end of the exchange. I slowed time and dematerialized as it swung past my head. It exploded against the trunk as I dodged. The blow was so powerful, it took the top part of the tree. I took a second to admire her power with a shake of my head. Even after the initial blow, the momentum of the shot was so powerful, it blew through the surrounding trees like a hurricane, tearing off branches and knocking over neighboring trees. Annoying, she replied, but cute. She was a subatomic with the ability to vanish. It was one heaven of a combination. Her ability to conceal her power until she was ready to strike was impressive. She was a beast to contain without training. Not fast enough, I replied, materializing inches away from her. She spun around, surprised. I dodged her blow. Her mind raced, trying to figure out when I actually dodged the shot. She smirked, shaking her head, impressed. Why am I surprised? She replied, continuing to shake her head. Wham! I struck, pulling my kick. The blow landed just below her shutdown button. It was a glancing shot, but potent all the same. She flipped violently before once again using her weapon to stop the momentum. Snap! She grimaced as the sudden impact jarred her shoulder out of place. Ah! She grunted. She tried her best to conceal her injury with a quick smirk as her hair fell over her face. Good shot, she replied. Thanks for pulling it. I nodded, acknowledging her words. Well, I wouldn't want to be on the wrong end of one of those concentrated blasts of yours. Her face changed for a brief second as a slight show of fear was present. She saw me as a softie, and the prospect that I was actually prolonging the fight to showcase my skills was upsetting, to say the least. But she quickly saw through my bluff. She understood it was something I was telling myself. She watched me throughout the trials, and if I had a real weakness, it was my lack of a killer instinct. She knew her idea was the more likely scenario. I don't believe you, Tim, she poked. I think you spared me. Her words were a letdown. She was right, and I knew it. I figured maybe if I bluffed, I wouldn't be as transparent, but she saw through it almost immediately. Maybe, I relented. I guess we'll see. I watched her as I plotted 10 shots in succession. I had gone into overdrive, and she was about to feel the full extent of my skill. But before I could attack, she raised her hand, stopping me. Whoa, she replied, stopping me. I've done exactly what I needed to do. No need to go out in a blaze of glory, right? She exhaled. It was her goal to impress me, and the kick I pulled was just the indication she was looking for to cement a lasting impression. She remembered the way I quickly dispatched of the earlier heavy line. and my hesitation to do the same to her was a clear indication that I saw her as something more than an obstacle in my way. It meant that in some way I had recognized her as a comrade of sorts. I watched, befuddled by her demeanor, not picking up on any of these nonverbal cues myself. "I think I've done enough," she replied, putting her sword away. "I'm done." "Just like that," I replied. "After all that?" "Yeah, I'm not stupid," she continued. "It's trending down from here. I have to be an idiot to not see that. Besides, more than likely your word is going to carry weight. Battalion captain, possibly? So, I'll go all kamikaze. I just ask that you remember me when you're choosing the squad." She was a typical vert, always analyzing with a plan beneath a plan beneath a plan. I looked at her, surprised by her words. I had no idea what she was talking about. I was wary of another trap. She was crafty as a fox and could strike at any moment. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. I kept my staff at the ready as I pressed her. "Battalion captain?" I replied, powering down. She stared at me for a baiting second. It was her turn to be skeptical. Her face quickly returned to normal when she realized who she was talking to. "Oh, yeah, I forgot about your whole BAU problem," she replied. "The battalion captain is the top prospect on the squad. Generally, they help the battlemaster choose the squad. They form the battle plan, strategy, all that." I nodded, acknowledging her words. I thought she was overestimating me, to say the least, but it was her confidence in me, not me lying or deceiving her, so I felt like it was fair game. Yeah, Master Michel had guaranteed me a spot on the team, but that was vastly different from making me captain. Herschel or Pete would probably be better candidates. I was a soldier. I wasn't a planner. I was a tool to be used, nothing more, but I would gladly take her gesture if it meant not having to rough her up. Before I could reply with my hesitation, she broke my concentration. "Have you seen what happens when you hit these things?" she replied, wincing. "Does it hurt?" I laughed at her, shrugging. I found myself drawn into her endearing personality. It was a slam dunk that, with or without my consideration, she would more than likely be a part of the squad, but I'm sure in her book it was a better scenario to just hit the button herself. Just in case I was actually serious with my earlier threat of showcasing my skill. Like a true vert, she understood every variable and came up with the best course of action that encompassed the best outcome against any scenario. Her talent wasn't battle like Uriah or analytics like Pete. She used the emotions of people. She was a maestro at using her emotions and the emotions of others to manipulate the outcome of a battle. Luckily, I was no slacker when it came to counter-planning myself. I quickly deducted her actions as a possibility. It was the sole reason I introduced the variable with my bluff. Any true vert, no matter how confident they were, just didn't have the personality to ignore such a huge unknown. I dictated the course with my words, instead of simply being a victim of it. "Just go," I replied, relenting. Her eyes grew, unable to hide her surprise. She laughed to herself, as if to be testing me. I used my sensory to feel for Sam's energy, hoping he was nowhere near us. His energy was inching closer by the second, and the last thing I wanted to explain was why I was allowing a formidable opponent to get away scot-free. "Are you serious?" she replied, still hesitant about my intention. "You're going to just let me leave?" I nodded, not really fathoming why I was doing it myself. "Yeah, just go," I replied, trying to keep myself from second-guessing my obvious stupidity. Sam was getting closer and closer. I stared around nervously as she showed a flirting smile. Her smile slowed my gaze as I stared at her, understanding her facade immediately. It was her fake one. She didn't trust me, or at least she perceived the possibility was high that I was setting her up. Either way, I didn't have the time for it. Sam was minutes away, and her skepticism was only sealing her fate. I highly doubted Sam would be as lenient in letting go of an adversary, especially when you consider the way he attacked Eve. Mara was toast if he caught sight of her. "Why? Are you developing a crush on me?" she replied playfully. "What do they say on Earth? Do you like me?" I would have probably chuckled normally, but now wasn't the time to encourage her with Sam's imminent arrival. I pointed, motioning for her to leave. "You are really trying to make me reconsider this, aren't you?" I shot back sarcastically. She smiled, picking up on my vibe. She turned to leave before looking back over her shoulder one more time. "Okay, hotshot," she replied. "Play possum." I stared at her emotionless with a blank face before forcing a smile. She returned it, tossing her hair out of her face. "You really are a real sweetheart," she replied with a spirited wink. She vanished just seconds before Sam arrived. He sniffed around frantically before turning to me with a frustrated demeanor. "Tim, did you get rid of her?" he asked, walking toward me in a pressing manner. I was hoping I could have met him before he actually saw me standing stagnant, but Mara's stalling made that impossible. A part of me wondered if it was intentional, but at the time I had no way of knowing for sure, but as it were, I was stuck in a position where I had no choice but to disclose everything. "No, I let her go," I relinquished, a bit embarrassed. He stared at me, nodding as if my words had confirmed his beliefs. He powered down as the light in his eyes diminished. "You let her go," he replied, with a surprisingly calm look on his face. "You let her go as in you made a mistake, or you literally allowed her to leave?" I exhaled in an aggravated manner. I wasn't aggravated that I let Mara go. I wasn't even really annoyed with Sam for asking. It was the task of having to explain things. "I allowed her to leave," I answered, knowing the follow-up question before I finished my sentence. Sam waited a second. When it was clear I wasn't going to continue, he pressed me. "Okay, why?" he questioned in a condescending manner. "I don't know," I shot quickly. "I just did." Sam's eyes narrowed in accusing glare as a smile crept onto his face. "Did you like her or something?" he pressed ironically. I withdrew at the sight of his accusing demeanor. "No," I shot back in an offended manner. He gave me a skeptical smirk. "No as in no like you said no with Eve, or really no?" he pressed. I glared with an annoying, unbreaking stare. "No, as in I absolutely don't like her. I just thought she was too cool a girl to beat up," I shot. Sam rolled his eyes at my statement. "What does that even mean?" he pressed. I shrugged my shoulder, not really knowing how to answer the question. "I don't know. Can we just drop it?" I shot, slightly embarrassed. Sam shook his head, unconvinced, and continued with a slightly more serious demeanor. "Well, Pete is asking for us to rendezvous with what's left of the last line," he explained. "Apparently, they got slaughtered using Ashton's plan." "What? Are you serious?" I countered. "So what happened to the heavy line?" "All gone except for Jaden," he explained. "They saw through Ashton's plan immediately. They sent both their heavy and second line directly at the teeth of our forces. We were outnumbered from the beginning. We lost our heavy line quickly. He said it was Psy and Cadmiel. They were too powerful. If it wasn't for Pete being smart enough to get us out of there, we would have probably been overpowered as well," he explained. "The good thing is that Ashton kid was clobbered, I heard. That girl Caddy nearly knocked him into next year. Huh, so much for taking advantage of our obvious advantage." I ignored his joke, focusing on the negative of what he said. "But what about Zek and Joe?" I pressed. "Weren't they on the heavy line?" "They are still not on the same page. They are nowhere near as lethal when they aren't watching each other's back," he continued. But luckily, the girls from Ashton's squad read him like a book and assumed the guys he would choose as the king would probably be one of them. Good thing Pete annexed that one, I shot, relieved. So what's left? Sam nodded in approval before answering the second part of my question. The rest of the group sacrificed themselves to take out the bulk of their heavy and second line, but the cost was heavy. Now, the only guys left are Pete, Lowell, and Jaden. We are meeting back up to form an assault against the girls who are currently transporting Zek and Joe back to their base, he continued. So, what are our odds? I asked, trying to maintain hope. He shrugged at the sound of my words. I don't know. On their side, it's the girls from our squad, their last line, and now, I guess the chick you just let go, he explained. I grimaced at the sound of his words. What in heaven was I thinking? I had no idea our ranks were so thin. I made a dire situation worse. I looked around in an attempt to quell the embarrassment that ate at me. Well, it's just a game. A tryout, Sam replied nonchalantly. Besides, it was that Ashton kid's fault. His plan was awful. He totally underestimated the power of the girls' heavy and second line. Abby was smart enough to hit the heavy line up in two. It gave us false confidence that we were taking out the heavy hitters. We had no sense of urgency. The heavy line, combined with the second line, destroyed our lesser forces. It was genius, but Pete was smart enough to move us out the teeth of the battle. It saved the battle. We still have the advantage because of that. Something told me his demeanor wasn't unique. The majority of the guys took the girls lightly, and we paid for it. In many ways, I had just done the same thing by letting such a powerful opponent flee. I was sure her survival was inconsequential. I never considered that they were actually winning the battle. My guys were down, and I threw another brick on their backs because of my arrogance. Let's go, I replied, determined. I shot off fast. I moved so fast, Sam had to struggle to keep up with me as I shot from branch to branch, surveying the layout, looking for Pete and the rest of the crew. Tim, said a voice as I bounced into another nearby barrier. It was a desert simulation. The anti-anointment was so strong, Sam and I sunk like bricks. I recognized Pete's voice right away. I pointed toward the direction I heard the sound come from. We fought to get our bearings. We sludged through the desert, working our way toward the sound of Pete's voice. There they are, Sam responded, pointing toward a capsule-like structure sticking out of the sand. The 4 guys left over were huddled, hiding behind a large mound. We fought through the sinking sand to meet them. Wow, I replied as Pete looked up at me. Bad day? He laughed to himself. His helmet had a telling scar that looked like a close call with the business end of a blade. The blow was still fresh in his memory. It was a strike he had every intention of returning. It would have been enough that the assailant got the upper hand on him, but the embarrassment of taking the blow in front of Psy only served to fuel his anger. He smiled at my question, but deep down he was fuming. "What do you want?" he shot, rubbing his head. "We were overrun." Herschel and Howell nodded, agreeing with his sentiment. They barely escaped the confrontation, and if it wasn't for Pete, they probably wouldn't have survived. Herschel regretfully took the girls lightly and was happy to get a do-over. Like Pete, he felt the need to reprove himself, but he had his sights on impressing Master Michelle. "Yeah, it was pretty rough," he seconded. Howell had a different motivation. His father barely said a word to him since the trials, and he was a minute away from what he knew would be another disappointment. It was a new feeling for him. His entire life he'd always been a prodigy, a shiny example of his lineage, but for the first time in his life he felt inadequate, and that was unacceptable. He jostled back and forth. His nerves kicked in, causing him to think about the implications of another failure. Yeah, that bonehead's plan was blown up from the get-go, Howell added, trying to take his mind off the task at hand. They knew what to expect, Herschel shot, cutting him off. They hit us with a full frontal barrage. They were smart enough to keep two of our heaviest hitters occupied while laying waste to our entire heavy, second, and last line. His mind immediately went to the blur that had laid waste to his unit in seconds. The twin katanas appearing all around him. Ashton's plan had put him at a disadvantage, and if Ashton would have survived, it would have been a struggle not to finish him off himself. He smiled just thinking about the look on his face as Sai's boot collapsed his shutdown. The satisfaction of watching his body fall lifelessly to the ground was a good consolation prize. "So how did you guys get out unscathed?" I asked, staring them up and down. "Well, some of you." Pete chuckled, rubbing the scar on his helmet. It was a pretty good shot. Judging by the depth of the scar, it was a surprise the helmet was still usable. Sam inspected it, thinking the same as Pete continued. "It's that noticeable, huh?" he replied sarcastically. His eyes lit up as he focused his energy on the scar. It slowly reverted until the scar was completely gone. Sam chuckled at the sight. "Well, only those of us who can see," Sam shot back. "Man, that has to come in handy." I nodded, touching the spot, still impressed by Pete's healing ability. Even with my ability, it wasn't something I could mimic. Yet. It was an ability that took discipline, no matter how knowledgeable the person was on the inner workings of the technique. He grimaced as he continued. "Yeah, but it is nowhere near your regeneration. It pales in comparison. I have to use my energy too intricately to do it in battle. Not to mention, it requires a substantial amount of my energy to do it," Pete replied, rubbing his temple. "It's literally like trying to contain a fire. Trying to concentrate on groups of damaged cells long enough to lock onto a damaged nerve synapse without affecting the healthy cells around it is a messy business. It's like brain surgery." I ignored the exchange and pressed him. He gave me a puzzled look for a second before he finally realized the reason for my skepticism. I knew Pete my entire life. There was no way he let someone get the drop on him. There was more to it, and I knew exactly what had happened. "You couldn't get yourself to do it, could you?" I pressed him. He dropped his head in a relenting manner, before returning my pressing stare with one of his own. We were both trying to align our signals. He seemed slightly confused by my phrasing, before shooting me a cynical, accusing stare of his own. "Look who's talking," he replied. "I know Eve wasn't in that heavy line that hit us, so my guess is she was in the splinter group that attacked you guys. Am I right?" I turned to Sam as he fought to hide back a grin. I danced around the embarrassing hypocrisy of pressing him. I stumbled with no real response to his insinuations. "What? I fought her," I shot back. "Ask Sam." Pete cut his eyes at my words and turned to Sam for confirmation. Sam looked at me in a cynical manner. He stared to the side as if to be considering the question apologetically. "Well," Sam replied, relenting, "technically I fought her. Tim kind of just set her up." I threw my hands up in protest. "Well, I'm not going to lie," he continued. I laughed it off before turning to Pete with a chuckle. Pete joked. Howell turned to Pete with a poking stare that caused the boy to remember his own actions. "Well, at least he got out of it in better shape than you did," Howell pressed with a chuckle. Pete nodded in a conceding way. We all laughed out loud at his gesture. It was a good thing. We hadn't had much time with the Alphas after the trials, and this was shaping up to be a pretty good bonding experience. With the elites gone, it was easier for the two legions to somewhat drop their guard, and it was really opening everyone up. We were naturally growing a rapport with one another. I wondered if the girls were having a similar experience. "Well, they hit us hard, like Herschel said," Pete explained. "I tried my best to avoid her, but they had us downwind. I knew I would never have it in me to fight Sai, so I just kind of strategically tried to stay out of her pathway, but I was making too much headway. It was inevitable that we were going to meet up sooner or later. When they finally cornered me in the base, I don't know, I just froze. Sam and I both had the same reaction to his story. We both were trying to match what he was saying with our preconceived notions of Sai, and it wasn't adding up. "So she tried to strike you down," I replied. "I mean, just like that?" "No way," Sam replied, speaking my thoughts. "Sai?" Pete shook his head, relieving our fears. His demeanor became cold and determined as he continued. "Well, no, she just kind of froze as well," he continued. "By the time I could grasp what was going down, one of the heavies caught me. If I hadn't stopped time, I probably wouldn't be here. I tried to save as many as I could, but I knew I had to get strong guys because we were going to be heavily outnumbered. In that small time window, all I could manage was Jaden, Howell, and Herschel. My assumption is everyone else was hit, but I didn't have the time to make sure. We had to retreat. My guess is they figured a battle with us would lead to unneeded casualties, so they allowed us to escape. They probably thought they should focus on our weaker guys. I mean, it's what I would have done. The smartest thing to do would be an attack to thin out our ranks, then use their powerful members and hope that quantity can outdo quality." I exhaled a worrisome breath. It was a lot more than quantity. They had quality as well. Not to mention a whole lot of unknown quantity. We were also at a disadvantage because Sam and I were without our BAU upload. We were completely blind to the abilities of the majority of the girls on their squad. I breathed deep, trying not to focus on the negative and stay positive. "Okay, what's the plan?" I shot, ready to get things going. Pete shrugged his shoulders before taking a second to think. He nodded, signaling he had something in mind as he continued. "Well, we are woefully outnumbered. We were lucky they had so much faith in their dissection of Ashton's plan. It benefited us that they snatched Zek and Joe up. It should give us time to develop some sort of offensive." I nodded, agreeing right away. It was the only good thing Ashton's plan had brought us. I couldn't believe things had gone so wrong so fast. But if anybody could come up with a plan to get us out of this, it would be Pete. "So I say we use the time we gained from that to scour this place and see if we can find some survivors," Pete explained. "Anything would help at this point. Once I know what I got, I can come up with the most efficient plan to win this thing." We gave him varying nonverbal cues, acknowledging his words, as we all tightened up and got ready to leave. I tightened my gear and checked my weapon, making sure I was completely ready before finally rising to head out. "So let's start at the heart of the base. If we have survivors, they're probably going to be second or last line guys," Herschel added. As he spoke, a slow orb-like bulb descended on top of us, catching us all off guard. "Don't waste your time," said a familiar voice. It was Kel. The orb dissipated as he strummed his guitar and placed his guitar pick in his mouth. "What? How did you get out?" Pete pressed, surprised by his presence. He shrugged, tossing his guitar axe strap over his shoulder. He could have fooled me. There was nothing about his appearance that was indicative of conflict. It was hard to believe he was caught in the middle of a heavy assault. His demeanor gave me pause. Did this guy hide out or something? "I put up a fight," he explained. Sam stared at me, picking up on my hesitation immediately. "You could have fooled me," he shot. "Well, I'm not exactly a hand-to-hand or thick-of-things kind of guy," he explained in his trademark accent, tipping his hat sarcastically. "Not that I needed to do much of anything anyways." His words gave us all pause. "Why?" I pressed. He shrugged his shoulders, raising his hat so that we could see his eyes as he spoke. "I think they were avoiding me," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. I think it was because of my power to get in their heads. I reckon they felt it was too dangerous to take me on, so they broke off and went after the rest of the stragglers while I hightailed it out of there when things got thin. A smile grew on Pete's face. Yeah, their assault was purely to take out as many of us as possible. It makes perfect sense. They figure they could pick up the perceived king and take the risk. Even if they're wrong, they have the numbers, Pete explained, admiring the gamesmanship as he spoke. Either way, you may have just given us a much-needed advantage. He signaled for us to come in. I was excited to get things underway. This time, I wasn't going to hold back. I could apologize later, but they had the upper hand. No one was going to have a notch on their belt for taking me out. So that's the plan, Pete explained. Sam, we're putting a lot on you. You've got to kill it in order for any of this to work. Tim will join you with our mock heavy squad. Cal and I will be at the base waiting to do our part. I nodded as we strapped up and shot off. This wasn't going to be easy, and we all knew it. We drudged through the sand until we finally got to the barrier. I turned to Sam as he gave me the okay. Be careful, I shot. Feel them out and don't trust your eyes. Remember, Sai has flash step. She is also a light bender. You won't see her coming. He nodded, taking a deep breath. He broke through the barrier, then disappeared in a show of light. I tracked him, giving him a second to gain ground. I turned to Herschel and Howell on either side of me. You guys ready? I asked, staring forward. Let's do it, Herschel shot. Howell bounced nervously, psyching himself up for the attack. Yeah, let's go, he shot, nodding involuntarily. We walked through the barrier. I felt like someone had taken a huge boulder off of my back. I had no time to think about things. Sam was probably knee-deep in battle at this point. No matter how good he wasn't going to last long. Okay, bring them out, I shot, tossing a capsule on the ground in front of me. As I did, Herschel swung his guitar to the front, gripping it firmly as he stroked the strings. Tobias landed with a growl. He hit it again as Damien leaped from his guitar. Like I said, it is extremely hard to do this, Herschel shot. Damien is the newest beast I have. He's still getting used to my commands. It's going to be a challenge. It's hard to use one note to control two beasts as it is. I hope Pete knows what he's doing. I can't just throw out a capsule. I have to actually manipulate these things. I nodded, listening to his suspicion, but I trusted Pete wholeheartedly. If he said it was the best course of action, it was the best course of action. I didn't doubt him for a second. I carefully did what Pete asked. I infused my light energy into the capsule. As I did, the meter on the side slowly rose until it read complete. The capsule exploded in light, and when it dissipated, Pete's large robot stood in its stead. You ready, Volts? I shot, turning to it. It pounded its metallic fist into its palm. Yes, I am ready, Timothy Eli, it replied, eerily robotic. Pete, are you sure about this? I asked via BAU. I was skeptical. Pete said that Volts was ready, but he seemed extremely green. If the girls had us outgunned in anything, it was smarts and experience. I was worried that he wouldn't be able to cut it. Trust me, I know he sounds a little robotic, Pete quickly covered. I'm still updating the program's AI patterns to make him sound less emotionless, but as far as battling goes, he's more than capable. As long as you guys stick to the plan, he'll do his part. I nodded, taking Pete at his words. Okay then, I shot. Let's do it. I ignored my reservation and shot toward the battle arena. We were surprised to find a struggling Jaden on our way to the battle area. It was obvious he had been through the ringer, but we were thrilled to add another heavy hitter to our small unit. Pete quickly diagrammed him into our plans. We knew what he was capable of, and I felt more confident heading toward the battlefield with him still in the game. I was more cocky than ever. I sped through the woods impatiently, trying to get to the girls. I could feel Sam's energy spike, which urged me to speed up. "He's starting!" I shot, yelling to the rest of the guys. Sam stared into the eyes of his 4 attackers. They all stood standing on tree branches above his head as he looked on from the ground below. Cy was nervous. Abby's assumption was that we'd send Sam, but it wasn't something Cy was looking forward to. She especially wasn't looking forward to battling him. To her, it was a lose-lose situation. Either she was going to get her butt kicked, or she was going to end up affecting Sam's confidence after a year of trying to build it back up. Neither outcome had her overly psyched. "You're going to need more than this, Cy?" he shot. Cy's eyes narrowed at the sound of his words. The girls readied themselves, getting into position, leaping from branch to branch until they had him completely surrounded. She kept her mouth closed, not wanting him to grow comfortable with the situation. She figured any communication would only serve to make him less nervous, and nervous was exactly how she wanted him. She waited until the line was in perfect position. She raised her hand, signaling to her teammates before taking a calming breath. Rise! They shot from around the trees like phantoms. Crash! Sam pulled his daggers, catching one of the assailants as she struck, blocking her blow. "There's 8. 1 at 1 o'clock, Sam thought, his mind going a mile a minute. 2 more 4 o'clock, and the rest waiting on an opening surrounding him. He was no longer the bravado-driven fighter he had been. He was no longer leaping into action to prove himself. He was now a calculating juggernaut who saw his moves ahead of time, breaking down his opponents in seconds. He spent the last year practicing with my grandpa, learning the Eli countering style. And even Grandpa couldn't help but be impressed by his quick grasp of it. He stood, holding off a sword shot from his assailant with one arm as he surveyed the battlefield. "Okay, Tim," he shot via BAU. "You got 2 minutes. That should be more than enough time for you to get here with Pete's slow bot." The plan was simple. We knew it would take time for Pete's bot to make it to the battlefield. The plan was for Sam to take on the brunt of their forces and hopefully buy us time. We had a good chance of getting Volts there before Sam was overpowered by the girls' ambush. "All right, do it," I shot. "We'll be there." Sam exploded with a surge of power. "Element Delta, wind command, wind herd," he commanded with a move of his arm. Wham! He caught the girl at 1 o'clock with a punching wind shot that caught her like a flush left hook. The assailant standing was still struggling as Sam stared at Cy the entire time, stalking her every movement. His show of power startled his assailants for a second. The second was all Sam needed as he sprang into action. Kick! Tap! He kicked her blade to the side, shouldering her into a nearby tree. As she winced in pain, he grabbed her by the neck of her armor and slapped her shutdown button. Cy's eyes grew. Something happened with John that propelled me and Sam forward rapidly. Over the year, she had only sparingly sparred with Sam, but every time they met, she was pleasantly impressed by his leaps in ability. Now, her pity was slowly turning into jealousy. She and Tim had always been side by side, polar equals, but it now seemed Sam was challenging for that spot, and he was getting there a little too quickly for her liking. Wham! Before the other 2 girls could blink, he caught one with a square back kick and the other with a punch. Both strikes landed flush on their shutdown buttons, but it wasn't the accuracy that caused Cy surprise. It was the ferocity. Sam could have easily tapped the girl's shutdown buttons, minimizing the damage, but he didn't hold back one bit. Slice! Crash! Sam dodged, falling to his back as 2 more assailants landed with hammer and axe shots. He narrowly sidestepped the attacks, causing them to nail the ground with cracking force. Spin! He did a breakdance-like spin on his head, narrowly dodging a striking blow from another axe swing. The girl's eyes grew big as Sam evened out, landing on his feet and nailing her with a sweep that sent her spinning. Crush! She landed on the ground with crippling force. Boom! Sam narrowly dodged a hammer shot. He went for the axe girl's shutdown button. Before he could capitalize, he was denied by a saving shot from her partner. Sam smiled as he dove backward, baiting the girl. Her friend was out of commission, and she was helpless. She turned, looking for backup, but she knew the second line wasn't coming. They had specific orders to stay out of the fray. They were there for the reinforcement. Abby had deducted that the boys would send Sam to trim down their numbers, and they knew it was pivotal to keep their numbers against me and the rest of our legion. Her job, along with the other attackers, was to hold the boys off long enough for them to get the twins to the base and hope that one of them was the king. She stared back at her friend Stacy. It wasn't her idea to even join the battalion team, and now here she was in a showdown, in a match, in a competition that she never wanted to be in. Come on, seriously, what's the worst that could happen? She replayed Stacy's comments over in her head with a roll of her eyes. Mary, why do you have to always be such a party pooper? Let's just do it. She had always been pulled into doing things she didn't want to by her best friend, and this was no exception. It was a way for her to meet new friends and blend in with the other Earthborn kids at the academy. It seemed harmless at the time. Now, she was staring down the barrel of a kid she had watched dismantle a heavy line in seconds, and she was supposed to take him on alone. Stacy, I'm going to kill you when you wake up, Mary mumbled under her breath as she inched toward Sam. Man, I hope this is quick and painless, she thought. Swipe! She swung her hammer like a mallet. She maneuvered it in an upward motion. She hoped her unorthodox swing would catch Sam off guard. She was wrong. Dodge! Kick! Loose! Sam flipped backward, dodging the blow. As he dodged, he extended his foot, kicking the bottom of her weapon's handle, dislodging it with one foot and nailing her with the other. Crash! With the momentum of his kick, he leaped backward, flipping, grabbing the weapon on his dismount. He stuck the landing, and before she could blink, he was winding up. She winced, expecting a severe shot, but Sam stopped himself, lightly tapping her shutdown button with the hilt of her hammer, causing her to drop to the ground in a convulsing fit. I told you, Sci, Sam mocked, walking up to the unconscious body of Stacy and tapping her shutdown button as well. Sci's eyes rolled in frustration. She was trying to keep her stoic demeanor, but it was hard because she wanted to rip into Sam. She was happy to see him lighten up on the girls he was fighting, but it was weird that he hadn't before. She remembered Eve's words about how aggressively Sam had attacked her, and if she hadn't just witnessed it herself, she would still have never believed it, but it was hard to refute the evidence in front of her. She understood Master Michel wanted them to go all out, but you'd expect a level of hesitation regardless. But that wasn't the case with Sam's attacks. He wasn't taking it easy on anyone, not even his Legion mates. She tried to force it out, but a part of her wondered if Sam's experience with his father and brother had changed his demeanor. I explained our ordeal with Sam's father and brother in the Earth realm, and she wondered if it had affected him. She swallowed her suspicion as a familiar faith energy signature approached rapidly. She turned, not saying a word to the rest of the line, instructing them with non-verbal cues to prepare them. They all nodded, acknowledging her words. We all landed hard and fast next to Sam. Man, Sam, you weren't playing, Jaden replied, staring around. You cleared this out. I wasn't surprised by Sam's skill at this point, but the familiar carnage of our last exchange with the girls was staring me in the face once again. The shattered trees, trunks, and craters showed a vicious battle that I knew was one-sided. It made me uneasy. Was this really necessary? I replied, running my finger alongside a bent tree trunk. I jolted back as the light energy from the blow burned me. You used that dense light energy, Sam? I pressed. That wasn't necessary. He rolled his eyes at me. Sam knew I had a right to question his temperament, but he wasn't focused on that. He was afraid to let people know what truly scared him about his actions. The last thing he needed was another reason for his Legion mates to distrust him. I knew something was running deep within him, but at the time I just saw the symptoms and didn't take the time to diagnose the problem. Yeah, he replied, putting on a facade. Look, I'm just trying to make sure they're done. They already have us outnumbered from us taking it easy on them. Do you want to risk taking them lightly even now? I grunted, as a part of me knew he had a point. The other side wasn't ready to table the discussion, but I knew it wasn't a time to address any deeper issues. My attention quickly switched as I immediately scoped out the battle area. The girls were in an opportune position. Eve, Sai, Cadmiel, Mara, Danny, and Uni were there, along with about 5 other girls. We had our fight laid out ahead of us, and it wasn't going to be easy. Stop hiding, I shot. I can see you, all of you. The girls slowly emerged from the hiding places, staring down at us. There's no need to hide, Danny replied. It's like Abby said. Sai, go. We'll hold them off and take out as many as we can. You just make sure they get those guys to the base. Sai grunted, annoyed, and in less than a blink of an eye, she was gone. She was too fast to get a bead on. Tim, go! Sam shot. Flash! Flash! Stop! I shot to tail Sai, following her energy signature, but before I could, Eve cut me off, along with 2 other assailants. Move, Eve, I shot. Girlfriend or not, I'm not holding back this time. Eve chuckled in an antagonized manner. So you were the one holding back? Eve shot angrily. I didn't flinch, staring her in the eyes. Yes, and I won't do it again, I shot sternly. She stared at me with eyes that could have stopped traffic. Good, she shot. Wham! Before I could blink, she had nailed me with a punch. Block, kick, dodge! I blocked her next blow before giving her a shoving kick to gain ground. She wasn't lying. Before, she had been holding back. Her speed was just as fast as I remembered in her battle with Cadmiel. I took a deep breath and prepared myself for a battle royale. Good shot, I replied, wiping faint blood from my lip. She didn't reply, but gave me a cold stare as she signaled to everyone else. As she did, Cadmiel and Danny mimicked her. Formation! They all screamed simultaneously. Flash! The girls flash-stepped to different spots in the arena. Danny, Uni, and 1 other girl surrounded Howl, Jaden, Volts, and Herschel. Cadmiel, Mara, and 1 other girl surrounded Sam. So, that's how things are breaking down, I shot, staring at Eve with an impressed nod. I powered up, as almost everyone followed suit, destroying the layout around us. What started out as a wooded barrier area was obliterated. It was completely bare after everyone powered up. Well, there's no more reason for talk then, I shot. Nope, Eve shot, her eyes on fire. Let's just fight. Now, I screamed, moving forward. Pete's plan worked to perfection. The plan was to get them to show their numbers. He wanted a head-on battle. Now, with the help of the girls' power explosion, we had one. No hiding, no evading, just combat. We all stood back to back as the girls converged on us. This is going to be fun, Cadmiel replied, punching her fist into the palm of her hand. Not as fun as you think, Sam replied. Block! He shot forward, taking her on with a flying front kick, as she blocked at the last minute. Sam flipped off her high block, landing awkwardly. "Gotcha," said one of the girls, trying to take advantage of the opening. Swing, kick! Jaden leveled her, as Sam dodged her kusarigama-like sword, flipping to safety. Kick! I leveled Mara with a front kick as she moved to contact Jaden. The battle was on, as I turned to see a full-on melee. Clang, ping, ping! Danielle hit bolts with a metal compound combination that knocked him backward, before Eve let loose with energy shots that exploded him back into his capsule form. "Well, that was a bust," Sam replied, as he and I rolled back to back. "All that planning to bring the rust spot, and they annihilated him in 3 seconds. I shook my head, annoyed. "Well, he did what he was supposed to do," I replied. Ping! Dive! Ping! Eve let out shots in our general direction as we both barrel rolled in opposite directions. Before I could land properly, I stopped time as shots rained down on me. The stunt allowed me the seconds I needed to dodge. Jaden grabbed me, tossing me to safety. He covered us both, punching a huge chunk out of the ground, sending a submerged boulder high in the air. He caught it, shielding us from the raining shots. He grunted, sending the boulder toward Uni with harpoon-like accuracy. "Uni!" Ruth shot, leaping in to protect her. It was a sacrificial move. There was no way she was going to be able to avoid the shot from Jaden. "Ruthie, no!" Uni shot, preventing her from interacting. "No!" Ruth shot via BAU, trying to force the change. "Uni, my gosh, why don't you ever listen to me? I told you to stay back!" "Sorry, Ruth, I thought I saw an opening," Uni shot, sacrificing herself. Oof! The boulder nailed her with shattering force. "Uni, she's such a brat," Ruth shot, staring at her sister, frustrated by her immaturity. Wham! She bounced off the boulder like a basketball hitting a fly. Crash! Jolt! She landed, ricocheting off the ground before sliding on her back and shorting out. "Howl! Ruth is vulnerable," I shot. "Go! Element Delta, Wing Command, Spinning Hammer," he shot. He tightened his stomach, narrowly dodging an attack. Kick! He used a sidekick to break down the girl's defense, then flipped over her extended leg. He maneuvered his boomerang, causing it to create a dense wind. He continued his motion into a throw as Ruth scrambled to find the boy. "Herschel!" he shot as it left his hand. "Dodge!" He dodged a blow by Mara, barrel rolling. Tobias hit Mara as she forced her sword into the beast's open mouth. "Good doggy," she grimaced, flicking the beast to the side. As the boomerang left Howell's hand, Herschel zoomed in on it. He created an invisible light band that caused the weapon to vanish from sight. Swoosh! Wham! Jolt! It appeared inches away from Ruth. Her back was turned as the weapon crashed into her with the force of a Mack truck. The jolt was instantaneous, but the shot had momentum that continued as her lifeless body slammed into Dan. "Get her, Sam!" I shot, shooting for her as well. Sam was still in the teeth of battle with Cadmiel. "I'm a little occupied," he shot. Flash! He exchanged weapon shots as I charged for the opening created by Howell's shot. As fast as I was, I felt as if I was going in slow motion. Danielle scrambled to her feet, but her balance was thrown. The more she fought to stabilize herself, the more unbalanced she became. It was giving me precious time. Explode! Her power sent me sprawling as I went in for the kill. She put up a wind barrier, and I should have seen it coming. It was an ordeal trying to aim my momentum to avoid the triggers on my back and chest. I forced myself on my side, then turned, controlling my momentum and angling myself on all fours. Danielle's barrier gave her confidence. She didn't even take the opportunity to get on her guard. My mind raced, studying her body language. She slowly dropped one hand, steadying herself. She didn't know. She had thrown the barrier as a defense mechanism. She felt safe, which meant she was open, vulnerable for a strike. I had to capitalize on it. Wind barrier, I shot under my breath to myself. Gotcha! I cocked back, grabbing a pebble from the ground. I flipped it like a coin in my hand, then launched it toward her. Danielle paid no attention, still unaware of the target on her back. Danny was too powerful and experienced to beat with sheer power and speed. It was the only chance I had. I ignored the fighting around me and aimed directly for her. I knew the pebble would be harder to detect within her barrier. It was just the right size to break through undetected. My only hope was that the barrier wouldn't throw off its trajectory. Whoosh! It hit the barrier with a slight tremor, but from Danielle's reaction, she felt it. Even so, with the size of the pebble, she still couldn't find it. To my surprise and delight, the pebble was still on the right target. "Where is it?" she shot, spinning around frantically. Jolt! The shot impacted her shutdown trigger with a hard jab. The bolt shot through her, quickly dropping her to her knees. "Danny too?" Eve shot, turning to Cadmiel. "Eve, get back!" Cadmiel shot. Clang! Kick! She clashed weapons with Sam, then pushed off with a kick before retreating to Eve's side. The other girls followed in quick succession. Their numbers were down, but they still had the advantage over us. "Eve," Cadmiel shot via BAU, "Sam and Tim are too strong, but we can concentrate our attack on Howell, Herschel, and Jaden. Howell and Herschel are long-range fighters. If we can get close to them, we can take them out with little effort." A part of her was uneasy about speaking to Cadmiel. Even though we said we were forgiving and forgetting what happened in trials, Eve still held a bit of animosity toward her for what she did to Beth. She often had to remind herself to let bygones be bygones, and this time was no exception. "Yeah, sounds good," she shot. "I'll take Herschel, you take Howell. Mara, you think you guys can hold your own against Sam and Tim in the meantime?" Mara shrugged. "Does it matter?" she shot. "All that matters is the win. We've had more than enough time to showcase what we've got. If we haven't done enough by now, we don't deserve to be on the squad. Besides, if Tim wasn't sweet on me, I would have been gone an hour ago." "Sweet on you?" Cadmiel pressed with a chuckle. Eve motioned for Cadmiel to let it go. She spent the first hour or so with the girl and had gotten used to her dry, sarcastic humor. Eve shook her head before giving her a signal to leave. Mara shot her playful wink as she tore off in my direction. "What do you think they're talking about?" Sam replied via BAU. We were scattered and vulnerable. The girls were all together. The second we used to catch our breath was used by the girls to regroup. I stared at the battlefield, tired and mentally spent. I had no idea how to combat their heavy numbers. It was too risky to attack them head-on. We had no choice but to wait on them to make a move. "I don't know, but I know we have got to regroup," I replied. "Fast." Flash! Before I could finish my sentence, the girls leaped into action. Block! Roar! Eve struck at Herschel as he met her strike, blocking her blow. Tobias quickly came to his aid, charging into Eve. The beast let out as Eve kicked it to the side. Eve knew she had to react before Damien appeared. She flipped forward quickly. Herschel was out of his element in a short-range fight. He didn't have the reflexes to counter Eve's lightning-fast blows. She flipped up in a cannonball-like motion and contacted his chest button with a dropkick, just as Damien and Tobias converged on her. Jolt! He dropped to the ground as the beast vanished along with him. "Herschel!" I shot, leaping to his defense. Before I could react, Mara landed inches in front of me with a slicing blow. I dodged backward, narrowly avoiding the blow. "Tim!" Sam shot, charging. Kick! He attacked with a roundhouse to Mara's high block that sent her flipping. Jolt! She landed on her back as her button triggered violently. Sam, watch out! I warned, leaping into action. Kick! I met a foot, angling it down inches from contacting Sam's shutdown button. Switch! Kick! Jolt! I shouldered Sam out of the way before contacting her button with a slicing kick that sent her down like a brick. Tim, look out! Howell yelled, launching his boomerang. I turned to see a girl with a bead right on my back. Wham! Howell's boomerang nearly decapitated her. She flipped, landing on her chest trigger, shorting her out. Howl! Said Ward. Kick! Jolt! Cadmiel nailed him with a vicious back kick, effectively shutting him down. His limp body ricocheted, violently sliding. I sighed hard. I backed into Sam as the remaining girls surrounded us. Eve stepped, pointing her guns at us, as Sam and I sighed in a frustrated manner. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I replied with a smirk. She gave an innocent shrug. What, me? She replied sarcastically. It's not over yet, Eve, Sam shot. Cadmiel laughed, shaking her head. Why not? She shot. It's just a tryout. You guys know you've made it on the squad. You're going to lose anyway. Why not just bow out gracefully and end this thing? A smile covered Sam's face. Did you hear that, Tim? How cute, huh? They think taking out those guys made things harder for us? He provoked. Wrong. All you chicks did was make it so we have nothing else to lose. Eve's face wrinkled at the sound of his words. You're bluffing, she shot shakily. I shook my head, joining in. I got a confession to make, Eve, I replied, my eyes lighting up. I said I wouldn't hold back, but I never said when. I was hoping you would be taken out by the other guys. I wanted to spare myself the annoyance of having to do it myself, but seeing as you've taken everyone else out, I have no other choice. Wham! I shot forward with an attack that even surprised Sam. I was a flicker, and in a flash, two of the girls dropped, convulsing from the shock of their buttons being hit. Eve and Cadmiel dodged the fray as I went on a rampage. Kick! I leveled one with a side kick that nearly cut her in half. Swipe! Clinch! My eyes were on fire as I fought to contain my surging power. I caught one of the girls in mid-swing, catching her blade strike between my hands like it was made of plastic. Punch! I contacted her shutdown button, angling her so she flew in succession, contacting the shutdown buttons of two other girls, thinning out their rank. Wow, he wasn't kidding, Cadmiel shot via BAU sarcastically. Well, that's Tim, Eve replied. Always saving the best for the absolute last moment. I should have expected it. Well, either way, it's 2-on-2 now, Cadmiel continued. We're outmatched. Let's get back to Abby, Ariel, and Sai. It's our only chance. That kid's a freak of nature. Oh no you don't, Sam shot. He cocked back, sending his dagger handle first like a dart in her direction. Jolt! He mapped her movement perfectly. His weapon contacted her just as she and Eve shot in different directions. The blow dropped Cadmiel immediately. Yes, got her, he shot, turning to me. I studied Eve, not about to make the same mistake of letting her away again. I slowed time and flashed to her side. Hi, I replied in a mocking tone. She stared at me, flabbergasted. Her eyebrows were at her hairline. Crap, she moaned. I nodded with an apologetic smile. Jolt! I lightly tapped her shutdown trigger before she could react to what was happening. I caught her body as it went limp. I felt the electricity as it shot through my body as well. She stared me in the eye as she vanished from the arena. A part of me regretted it, but I wasn't about to say it out loud. I had little time to sulk as Sam cut in. Amazing, he yelled, shooting to my side. I thought she was going to get away again. Why didn't you do that from the beginning? What do you want? I can't hurt that girl, I explained with a sigh. and I'm going to have just as much reservation about Psy. Yeah, me too, he poked. Either way, let's go meet up with Pete and Kel. They should have caught up with Ariel and Abby by now, he continued. Yeah, let's go, I shot, shooting off in a blaze of smoke. Sam stared at me in a way that made me feel uncomfortable. I stared forward, ignoring it as long as I could before I turned to him agitated. You gonna keep looking at me like I'm some freak? Or are you going to tell me what the problem is? I said, turning to him, throwing him with my words. He stumbled to find his words. He didn't know how to word what he wanted to say, but he felt it was extremely important to say it. He took a deep breath and tried to gather himself before continuing. Oh, sorry, Sam shot. It's just back there. I know, you were just bluffing about taking it easy from the beginning. I get that, but that speed in this barrier is... I don't know, it's freaky. His words, though he tried to sound as if he was joking, had a tremor of fear in them. I could sense his energy fluctuating, and it was obvious that there was something he was feeling that he wasn't saying. What do you mean, freaky? I pressed with a prying stare. This time, he realized immediately that his humorous facade did not go over, and there was no reason to keep it up. Clump! He landed hard on a nearby rock. I followed, landing next to him as he turned to speak. It's just, I was there, you know, when that guy said you could hear their BAU, and then we get back and you have a direct line with Lucifer, he shot. I'm just saying. My temper flared at his insinuation, and his hesitation to say what it was he was thinking only further agitated me. Sam, will you just say it? I spit, in no attempt to hide my growing animosity. This thing, you said that Semyaza guy said the witnesses always comes in threes, right? So, if they believe we are two of the witnesses, then who is the third? He muttered. He knew what he really wanted to say, but he couldn't get himself to just say it. I stared at him before replying. I don't know, I shot. And what does that have to do with my BAU and Lucifer? He nodded in an attempt to lighten the tension, but I didn't ease up as I stared a hole through him. I don't know why I needed him to say it. A part of me could tell from his energy signature and body heat. My keen senses aided me as I searched every nonverbal clue and analyzed it like a puzzle. There was something explosive he wanted to say, something that had him uneasy, and I wanted to know what it had to do with my abilities. Well, one of these guys, isn't he a witness for the Antichrist? He continued. It's just been bothering me ever since Jade told us he thinks we might be the witnesses. With your connection and the wrath that my power has, the things that we can do, what if one of us is, you know? No way, I shot back angrily. I couldn't tell you if my aim was to convince him or myself, but I do know when I said it, I believed it. Look, there is a reason for the power, and my connection too, but neither of us would ever be a prophet for evil. We're not evil, I shot. I calmed myself, not wanting to sound like I was ridiculing him for expressing how he felt. His words were candid, and as off-base as they were, I felt encouraged that he felt comfortable enough to disclose them to me, and I didn't want to jeopardize that in the future. Sam, we have a choice in this thing, I shot. We're not going to turn bad. I'm not, and you're not. I won't let you, you won't let me, and the guys won't let either of us. We'll find this third guy. We will, and we'll stop him. But all this is irrelevant, because no matter what Jade and Max say, we don't know if we are the witnesses, I explained. You don't think we are the witnesses? He replied, confused by my words. I shrugged, not really knowing how to respond. I don't know how I feel, but judging by my interaction with Semyaza, I'm not sure it could be any of us, I continued, trying to convince myself more than him. Look at Jacob's power, Sean's, or Luke's. Some funny language and show of power doesn't convince me. Jade and the guys are just guessing, and judging how wrong they've been about everything else, I wouldn't be surprised if their assumption about this is wrong as well. I mean, even they say they're just guessing. The only one around us who knows for sure is John, and he isn't talking. "But what about the language?" he replied. "You don't think that's some type of sign?" I shook my head. We had just met someone who had a strong connection to Jesus. Maybe the connection did something to our minds and bodies, I shot. Sam nodded, taking in my words. His energy signature went back down to normal along with the rest of his vitals. My words had done the job for him, and partly for me as well. A lot of the points I made never occurred to me until I said them out loud to Sam. They were really causing me to actually analyze things, and I slowly started to feel better about things also. "Yeah, you're right," he agreed. "It had me a little nervous, but you're right. It could be any of us." I fixed my bag harness and repositioned it on my shoulder before continuing. "And whether or not we are the witnesses or not, we have a role to play in this upcoming war. We can't control those things, but we can control getting better." Sam powered up as I followed suit. "Let's go end this thing," I said, shooting off. Flash! Flip! Flash! Flip! Me and Sam shot through the simulator with blazing speed, flipping and leapfrogging each other as we shot for the girl's base. "Pete!" I screamed, catching a glimpse of him first. I signaled to Sam and pointed at Pete, who was crouching behind a boulder that towered over the girl's base. "Where's the rest of the guys?" Kel asked as we landed with a light thud. "Eve and Cadmiel," Sam answered. "We put up a fight, but it was 12 against 4. Speaking of which, Pete, that hunk of junk prototype was useless." "Shh!" Pete ordered angrily. "Are you trying to alert them before we can even make a move?" Sam withdrew apologetically. "Oh, sorry," he apologized. "Besides, his job was to emulate force which would intimidate them into exposing their true numbers," he explained. "I know he needs work, but he did his job all the same." Yeah, I cut in, trying to kill the bickering. Sai paced back and forth, still protecting Abby and Ariel. "Hey, be careful," Zek replied, fighting to get the glowing cuffs off. The anti-anointment bracelets looked way oversized as he and Joe drudged toward the base. Joe was also cuffed, but his expression was slightly less grim. Zek felt useless, and his capture only made him feel worse. He could tell he wasn't at his best without Joe. He wasn't paying attention to what was going on around him. He was in deep thought as they inched closer to the girl's base. He wondered if he was ever any good without the help of his brother as motivation. "Man, Zek's faith energy is fluctuating like crazy," I whispered. Sam nodded, with his back resting against the huge rock we were sitting behind. "Yeah, same here. I can tell that just from looking at him," Kel added. "It's been like that since we started the tryouts. He hasn't been himself," Pete added. "Are we going to sit here and play couch psychiatrists, or are we going to win this thing finally?" Sam added. We all nodded as Pete huddled us together. He went over an elaborate plan that ended with a surprise. "Yeah, Kel and I will go first," Pete added. "What? Why?" I shot, disapproving. "We have the advantage, don't we? Let's just hit them head on. We free the twins and we outnumber them 6-3. Game over, we win." Pete shook his head. "No, Kel and I are not close-range fighters. With Sai, we'll last minutes at best. The twins in their current state will last less than that. In the end, it'll be you and Sam versus the three of them. If Kel and I reveal that you two are the king and point man, it might cause them to shoot after you guys. Unlikely, but they might bypass us to look for you," he explained. "That's an advantage that has to be broached, even if it might mean sacrificing me and Kel." I shook my head. That plan made no sense. I knew Pete. This wasn't the best plan to win. It was the best plan to avoid him having a head-on battle with Sai. "No, that isn't a good plan. It may cause them to give up on the king strategy altogether. They might just shut down the twins, make quick work of you guys, and then scatter, making things worse for us, I shot, picking up on the holes in his plan immediately. He shrugged apologetically. He was smart enough to know that I saw through his facade. Look, even if I try, I can't hurt Psy. I just can't, he shot. His words caught Kel's attention. So what, he's sweet on this gal? Kel added, turning to me. Sam and I nodded, answering his words as he continued. Then we have to go with the first plan. If he's down, the twins definitely aren't gonna watch my back, Kel explained. He had gained little ground after the trials. His relationship with the twins was just as volatile as the day they finished. He explained to them that he didn't make them say anything they said. He just brought out true feelings, nothing more, nothing less. But he was talking to children. It only served to make them angrier, as they refused to admit it was what they both truly felt. As a result, they both still had Kel in their sights. As Kel deducted, they may sooner turn on him than help him out. I didn't like it, but Pete's plan of action was the best plan of action. All right, but we're going to be right on your butt, I shot. If they take you out, we're attacking immediately. Pete nodded, agreeing to my terms. We all strapped tight and gave each other various forms of an acknowledgement as we leaped into action. Flash! Kel shot off, with Pete right on his tail. We gave them a second. You ready? I shot. Come on, he replied, powering up. I followed suit, trying my best to gather energy without affecting the environment around me. The last thing I wanted to do was alert Psy of our whereabouts before Pete could even try to make things work. Okay, let's go, I replied, finally reaching a decent amount of energy. Flash, flip, flash, flip! We shot through, bounding from rock to rock in hot pursuit of Pete and Kel. When we finally had them in our sights, we slowed down a bit. They landed, cutting off Ariel and Abby. Pete! The twins shot, smiling. Pete took a deep breath as Abby and Ariel stared at them, thrown by their sudden appearance. Where's Psy? He shot, staring around. Abby and Ariel never answered, continuing to stare forward. It doesn't matter. Look, those two aren't the king and point man, Abby, Kel added, pointing at the boys as he spoke. It's Tim and Sam. You're wasting your time taking them back to the base. A smile slowly appeared on Abby's face. Ariel turned to her, returning her smile with a smile of her own. Their expression left the boys confused as they scrambled, trying to figure things out. Oh, we know, she shot. Orb! Her eyes lit up instantly, catching us all off guard. Tim! Sam! Watch your back! What? I thought, unable to comprehend why we were the most pressing thing on his mind. What is he? Wham! Jolt! I turned just in time to see Psy catch Sam with a direct knee shot to his shutdown button. He convulsed, then dropped to the ground. Sam! I shot. I slowed time as Psy winked as she aimed her bow directly at me. I reached and grabbed my staff just in time. Element Beta, Water Command, Water Wall! I shot, dodging backward. Sizzle! The lightning shot collided with the wall of water as I dove for safety. I turned just as the twins' bodies fell lifelessly to the ground. It was a trap the whole time. They had us. Pete and Kel were no match for Ariel and Abby at such a close range. I had to do something. Flash! I shot as fast as my energy could take me. I appeared right behind Ariel instantly. Even I was surprised at how quickly I made the jump. Teleportation was tricky. Even though it gave the impression that a person could move effortlessly through space, it was more complicated than moving with Flash Step. You could only move yards at best. I covered the length of 2 football fields in the blink of an eye. How? Abby replied, surprised to see me. Flip, wham, jolt! My sudden speed boost threw off my aim. I came in too low. I quickly changed the angle of my strike, pushing off her upper leg, allowing my momentum to send me over her head. I flipped and caught her with a back kick to her shutdown button that sent her sliding before shutting her down. I grunted, sending my staff at Abby. Clang! Pete and Kel, look out! I warned, seeing her plan before she could. Her twin arrows were a dead giveaway, but my sudden power absorption, mixed with the new anointment barrier I had crossed into, buckled me before I could react. Wham! Jolt! Pete and Kel couldn't react fast enough, as the two lightning shots landed flush, nailing them both directly in the chest, shutting them down. She turned to Abby with a smile as I fought to a knee. Please, hurry and hit his button before he hulks out, she shot. Oh, Abby replied. Ha! She tapped my shutdown button. Jolt! I felt the light shoot through my body, shutting down all my senses before I fell flat on my face. Warp! The atmosphere changed as I slowly felt the daze wear off. I was still weak from my show of power, but with the anti-anointment field gone, it was little more than fatigue as it wore off. Yeah! I turned to see the girls celebrating on the other side of what had transformed itself into a classroom. They were all hugging Cy and Abby, taunting us with points and smiles as we all swallowed our pride. Man, I grunted as Pete and Sam pulled me to my feet. Yeah, they got us, Sam added. But how? Joe added. They baited us. I didn't have enough time to diagram things as well as she did, and she played us for a fool. She set it up perfectly. She made it seem as if they were leaving us out of some sense of loyalty. We never questioned things because we saw them as stereotypical girls that couldn't overcome their emotions, when in actuality, she disposed of all our close and mid-range fighters. That seriously handicapped us in direct combat. Her concern from the get-go was Sam and Tim. She figured we'd come after the twins after they took out the bulk of our squad because it was the only move we had left. So they gave us the impression that we had the upper hand by sending the bulk of their heavy line at us. Once we took out their heavy line, she knew we would be confident we could beat the three of them with just Tim and Sam alone, so she made herself bait. We went for it. We never suspected they were already making their move on Tim and Sam. Tim's ridiculous power still almost saved us, but it backfired when he absorbed his new power. She knew that the heaviest anointment shield would leave me and Kel vulnerable to Cy's physical speed and power. It was a perfect trap, Pete shot, admiring the plan as he spoke. Absolutely, Abby replied, placing her hand on his shoulder. Yeah, we kicked your butts, Eve shot. I nodded with a chuckling smile. And it's all my fault, Ashton added as we came together. Well, yeah, it was, his Legion mate shot as everyone burst into laughter. He seemed like a nice enough guy. I didn't want to judge the guy off one interaction, especially a situation like that one. The kid made a mistake. It was a tryout. It was water under the bridge. Don't worry about it, man, I replied. We all played our part in underestimating the girls. Okay, Master Michelle replied, catching all our attention. We all formed a line, with the girls giving us prods and triumphant pokes. We all took our humble pie with shrugs and nods as Master Michelle continued. Amazing showing, girls, amazing! All of you, really. We definitely have a crop this year. We all nodded, taking in his words as he continued. Well, I will start by naming the battalion captain and his second-in-command, he continued. He stared down at his holopad as he continued. Pete and Abby, please make your way down, he replied, causing a faint whisper through the crowd of students. The rest of you, good job. You are dismissed, he replied, saluting us. We will be along shortly to let you know who made the first cut, then each cut after that will be every 10 minutes or so. We all returned the gesture with salutes of our own. I turned to Cy, who once again winked at me, causing me to laugh out loud. It was obvious it would be a while before we heard the end of this, but I was okay with it. It was fun despite the outcome, and more importantly, it took my mind off things for a little while. Considering all things that lay ahead, it was a welcomed escape.